The morning of Game 2 arrived quietly in Philadelphia. No fanfare, no crowd noise, just a medical staff, a training room, and a 3-1-year-old body that had already been through more than most careers ever ask of a single human being. Joel Embiid woke up that morning not with focus or fire, but with soreness that had settled deep into his ankle and hip overnight. The kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply refuses to leave. The kind of player learns to read not with hope, but with honesty. And what his body told him that morning was not what anyone in Philadelphia wanted to hear. He had returned from an emergency appendectomy just weeks earlier. He had carried his team through a 7-game war against the Boston Celtics, posting 34 points and 12 rebounds in a deciding game that most people had already written off. He had limped up the court after a rebound in the final minutes and smiled through it afterward, telling reporters he was faking it. He was not faking it. And now, hours before tip-off of a playoff elimination game, the body that had carried him through impossible moments had reached its limit for that night. Coach Nick Nurse delivered the news plainly. Embiid was out, and for a franchise that has built everything around one man, that single word carried the weight of an entire era. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, consider subscribing. There is more where this came from. Yaoundé. Cameroon is not a city that produces NBA centers. It produces soldiers, diplomats, traders, people shaped by discipline and necessity. Joel Embiid was born into that world, the son of a military officer named Thomas and his wife Christine, in a household where structure was not a philosophy, but a way of surviving. Basketball was not part of that structure. For most of his adolescence, Embiid was a volleyball player, tall, coordinated, drawn to a sport that made sense for someone built the way he was. Then a coach handed him a VHS tape of Hakeem Olajuwon, and something shifted that could not be unshifted. He was 15. He had never seriously considered basketball as a future, but he watched that tape over and over, pressing rewind in a way the coach never anticipated, studying footwork and angles and a fluidity of movement that seemed almost impossible for a man that size. 2 months after attending a local camp run by NBA role player Lukumba Amut, Embiid was on a plane to Florida, a teenager who had never played organized basketball on American soil, heading toward a future that did not yet have a shape. When he arrived at Montverde Academy, his first session ended with teammates laughing, a pass hitting him in the stomach, and a coach sending him home early. The beginning was not graceful, but beginnings rarely are for the ones who end up going the furthest. American basketball has a particular way of processing raw talent. It runs it through systems, high school programs, college rosters, draft pipelines, and by the time a player emerges on the other side, the rough edges have usually been smoothed into something more manageable, more predictable. Joel Embiid moved through those systems faster than almost anyone in the modern era, from Montverde Academy to the Rock School in Gainesville, then a single season at the University of Kansas institutions that saw what he could become before he fully understood it himself. Kansas coach Bill Self inherited a player who didn't know what March Madness was and had chosen the program simply because someone he trusted told him it was the best. That kind of unguarded trust is rare. So is the talent that came with it. But the Philadelphia 76ers presented an entirely different kind of system, one built not around development in the traditional sense, but around patience as a competitive strategy. The process, as it became known, asked Embiid to wait while the franchise accumulated assets around him. What nobody fully accounted for was what waiting would cost him physically. 2 full seasons lost before he played a single NBA minute. A franchise philosophy that placed enormous future weight on a body that was already showing signs of fragility before he ever stepped onto a professional court. The system believed in him completely. The question was always whether his body would believe in the system long enough to deliver on everything both sides had promised. What made Joel Embiid different was never simply size. The NBA has always had large men. What it has rarely had is a 7-footer who processed the game the way a guard does reading defensive rotations before they happen, feeling pressure without seeing it, understanding that the most dangerous move is often the one never taken. The Hakeem Olajuwon tape did something specific to his basketball mind. It taught him that footwork was not a physical skill, but a thinking skill, that the space between 2 defenders is a mathematical problem solved in fractions of a second. By the time Embiid reached his peak seasons in Philadelphia, he had developed one of the most complete offensive games the center position had ever seen, capable of operating from the post, the mid-range, and beyond the arc with equal fluency. But the game within the game for Embiid was never purely offensive. It was about managing energy across a body that could not afford to spend what it did not have. Every minute he played carried a calculation behind it, how much to give in the first quarter so there was enough left in the fourth, when to absorb contact and when to avoid it, how to remain dominant while quietly conserving. Coaches built minutes restrictions around him. Medical staffs monitored him with a precision usually reserved for post-surgical recovery. And through all of it, Embiid made it look natural, made it look effortless, which was perhaps the most extraordinary deception of his entire career. The game he played publicly was impressive. The one he managed privately was something else entirely. There is a particular kind of pain that has nothing to do with the body. It arrives in the space between what a person knows they are capable of and what their circumstances will allow. Joel Embiid has lived in that space repeatedly, and the entries on that list read less like setbacks and more like a sustained argument against possibility. A broken navicular bone before his first NBA game was ever played. 2 full seasons of watching from the sideline while teammates competed and a franchise waited. Then the death of his younger brother Arthur in a car crash in Cameroon in October 2014, a loss so complete that Embiid considered leaving basketball entirely, considered returning home, considered whether any of this was worth the distance it required from the people he loved most. He named his son Arthur years later. Some fractures never fully close. The physical list only grew from there. An orbital fracture in his first playoff appearance, forcing him to wear a protective mask, a torn meniscus in 2017, then the same knee, the same lateral side. Again in 2024, Bell's palsy, a busted shoulder, more than 100 documented injuries across an 11-year career. And then January 30th, 2024, the moment that may define everything that comes after. Jonathan Kuminga fell onto Embiid's left knee accidentally, and in that single unscripted collision, one of the most dominant scoring seasons in 60 years of basketball came to a stop. Prior to that moment, Embiid had scored more points than minutes played, a feat not accomplished since Wilt Chamberlain. The fracture points were never just physical. They were interruptions of something that deserved to be witnessed whole. What do you think has tested Embiid more, the physical injuries, or the moments when he had to decide whether to keep coming back? Leave your thoughts below. What the box score never shows is the morning before the morning. The hours before shoot-around when a body that has been surgically repaired multiple times has to be coaxed back into readiness, ice, treatment, movement, stillness, then movement again. For Joel Embiid, preparation was never the simple ritual it is for players whose bodies respond predictably to rest and work. His preparation was negotiation, a daily conversation between what he needed to do and what his physical condition would permit. The training staff around him became as important as any coaching decision, because the margin between Embiid available and Embiid unavailable was often measured not in weeks but in hours, not in diagnoses, but in how a particular morning felt when he first put weight on a compromised joint. There is a discipline specific to athletes who play hurt that is rarely discussed, honestly the discipline of not showing it, of walking into an arena and performing at a level that makes the crowd forget what the medical report said that morning. Embiid mastered this in a way that was almost unfair to those watching, because it created expectations his body could not always sustain. When he returned from an emergency appendectomy in days rather than weeks, it looked like will. When he dropped 34 points in a Game 7 having carried significant physical damage through an entire series, it looked like greatness. Both things were true, but behind both was a preparation process that demanded more from him than it should have, and that he gave to anyway every single time the door to the court was open. No player becomes who they are in isolation. For Embiid, the human architecture around him has been as formative as any coaching system or training regimen. It started with Luc Mbah, a Moot, a Cameroonian NBA veteran who saw something in a 16-year-old volleyball player and made a single phone call that rerouted an entire life. That relationship carried a particular weight because it was built on shared origin, on the understanding that the distance between Yaoundé and an American basketball court is not just geographic, but cultural and psychological. Mbah Moot didn't just open a door. He walked Embiid toward it at a moment when the destination was still completely invisible to the young man himself. Then there was Tyrese Maxey, a different kind of relationship, built not on mentorship, but on mutual dependence. Two players whose careers became intertwined in a city that needed both of them to be great simultaneously. When Embiid was absent, Maxey carried Philadelphia. When Embiid returned, Maxey created the space that made him dangerous again. Their partnership on the court reflected something deeper than strategy. It reflected the kind of trust that only develops when two people have genuinely needed each other under pressure. And beneath all of it was the memory of Arthur Embiid, whose absence shaped Joel in ways no relationship ever could. The brother he lost became the son he named, the weight he carried quietly into every arena, the reason behind a resilience that statistics were never designed to measure. Game 7 against the Boston Celtics in the 2026 playoffs will be remembered differently depending on who tells the story. For casual observers, it was an upset, a stunning reversal by a team nobody believed in after falling 3-1. But for anyone watching Joel Embiid closely, it was something more specific. It was a masterclass in doing the essential things, when the ornamental things are no longer available. He was not the Embiid of the MVP season that night. He was not scoring more points than minutes played or operating with the physical freedom of a man in his prime. He was a version of himself that had been edited down to what mattered most: positioning, patience, and the ability to make every possession feel heavier than the one before it. 34 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists. Those numbers tell part of the story. What they don't capture is the sequence of decisions that produced them, the moments he chose not to force, the defensive coverages he identified before the ball moved, the way he controlled the pace of a game that Boston desperately wanted to run. He became the first player in NBA history to score 100 points in a playoff series, having missed the first 3 games entirely. After the final buzzer, he limped up the court securing a rebound, and the Philadelphia faithful held their breath. Then he smiled, told the press he was faking it. The smile was real. The limp was real. Both things existed simultaneously, the way they always have with Joel Embiid, the way they probably always will. The statistics that define Joel Embiid's career are genuinely extraordinary. An MVP award, a 7-0-point game that broke a franchise record set by Wilt Chamberlain, an Olympic gold medal, scoring averages that place him among the most productive centers the sport has ever seen. But numbers, by their nature, only count what happens. They have no mechanism for measuring what was prevented the seasons cut short, the playoff runs that ended before they should have, the version of Embiid that existed in full health for stretches so brief that most of the basketball world only caught glimpses before something gave way again. The career that is documented in the record books is remarkable. The career that might have existed under different physical circumstances is a question that will never have an answer, and that absence is its own kind of loss. What the numbers also never captured was his leadership, the specific weight a player carries when an entire franchise has organized itself around his presence and his absence in equal measure. Philadelphia built around him, waited for him, restructured around him, and then waited again. Through all of it, Embiid showed up when his body allowed and pushed past what was reasonable when it did not. That is not a trivial thing. There is a particular emotional intelligence required to remain present for teammates and a city, when your own physical reality is constantly uncertain to be the anchor of an organization, while privately negotiating with a body that operates on its own timeline, indifferent to contracts, expectations, or the desperate loyalty of a fan base that has never stopped believing he could deliver them something historic. The conversation about what comes next for Joel Embiid is one that Philadelphia has been quietly having for years, and one the rest of the basketball world has recently joined. 3 years remain on a contract worth nearly $200 million. 38 games played this regular season. An emergency appendectomy survived in days. A Game 7 carried on a body that had already given more than it was asked to give. The numbers that define his immediate future are not the ones on a box score. They are the ones inside a medical file that grows thicker every season. And yet, the most honest thing that can be said about Joel Embiid in this moment is that nobody actually knows what comes next, because he has consistently done what nobody expected, returned from what nobody thought was returnable, and performed at levels that made the pessimists look away first. What is certain is that every game he plays from here carries a weight that goes beyond wins and losses. Every healthy appearance is a small argument against the narrative that has been building around him, that his best days are behind him, that the body has finally made its final decision, that the borrowed time has run out. Those arguments may eventually be proven correct, but they have been proven wrong before. In training rooms, in playoff arenas, and quiet mornings, when a man who started as a volleyball player in Cameroon decided once more that the game was worth whatever it cost him. The echo of that decision, made first at 15 with a VHS tape and remade every season since, is what will outlast the injuries, the contracts, and the uncertainty. It is what will remain when everything else has been settled. If this story moved you, a like means more than you might think. And if you want to see what comes next, we will be here.